Welcome, everyone. Kicking off our IntegrateLive rundown for our Applying 21 CFR Beyond Life Science episode. I'm Jeff Knepper, co-host and co-founder here at IntegrateLive. I've got a big empty chair beside me today. Alan Ray could not make it today. He's off on official company business up in Minnesota and unfortunately had a conflict. But I'm joined by a great cast and crew from last week's project. Welcome, everybody. Thanks for being here.
Cool. Thanks
for having us.
Yeah, in our studio, who do we have? Let's just do a quick round robin. From Skellig, Amy and Josh are here. We've got Lenny from Flow Software, Clark from Canary, Kyle from Kepware, and Travis from Inductive Automation. Hey, let's go reverse order of what I've got on my screen in front of me. So Travis, you're up first. Thanks so much for your participation last week in the project.
No, of course. Thanks for having us.
Yeah, absolutely. So Travis, we've talked a lot. I mean, goodness, you're one of my conference buddies. Get to see you all the time, and I love it. But for those that don't know you, we mentioned last week that you've been at IA now for, I think you said almost 20 years. And this was basically, if I remember the story correctly, you were still in school when you started off with them. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, I was actually a sophomore in college when I started with Inductive Automation. It was meant to be, a part-time gig, turned into a full-time gig while being a full-time student. But of course, I've enjoyed all of it. And I got brought in here by a couple of colleagues. Colby Clegg and Carl Gould were also at the same university that I went to, and we all came in to work with Steve on the integration side of the business really early on.
So, for those that aren't familiar with the full story as well as the current structure of the company, I'd say that it worked out really well for the three of you for being early adopters.
Yeah, agreed. I mean, for those to kind of understand the beginnings of Inductive Automation, we started, our founder was an integrator. So Steve Heckman ran an integration business in Sacramento for over 20 years. He was looking for different software and ultimately couldn't find anything off shelf, so he wanted to build his own for his integration business for his customers, and that's where he brought in us from UC Davis, and we came in to help him with building tools internally for his system and to help build the software itself. And it was so successful that it turned into being now, of course, Inductive Automation, a software company that we are today.
And the three positions that you all hold?
Yeah, so I'm Chief Technology Evangelist. Colby Clegg is our CEO. He was the first that came in and built the first product we had called Factory SQL, and Carl Gould's our CTO. He came in and built the first Factory PMI product. So those are the original two developers. I kind of did a lot of other side things around the first support and first trainer and all of that. But now I'm here to kind of spread the word of Ignition.
Yeah, how awesome is that? And so what's the 5-year, what's the 5-year, 10-year dream for you? What's next?
Well, I mean, world domination is what's next, right? I mean, going to be the de facto standard. No, it's we just want to continue helping push the industry forward, right? Like I find it really rewarding to help, bring in modern technology and bring in a community of partners, bring the best of breed, and be able to put that together so customers can win. That's what we're here for, right? We want to make the customer journey better. So I'm just excited to continue that.
That's awesome. Well, look forward to hearing more from you. And thanks for taking the time today. Hey, Kyle, how's everything over in Kep World?
Hey, Jeff. Thanks for having me back. It's good, man. It's always good up in Portland, Maine. We're actually in the middle of moving offices. We'll still be in the old port, but just a little bit down the street. So we got a little bit of a work from home thing this summer, but we're beginning of July. We're looking to get back in and be back downtown Portland.
Well, that's exciting. Now, you guys just came off of a huge event.
We did.
What was it? LiveWorks?
LiveWorks, yeah, it was really awesome actually. So that was my first one. I joined Kepware in the summer of 2019. I had just missed LiveWorks, And then obviously we had some weird event after that, so we weren't able to do big live events for a while. But it was cool to be back, and I'm definitely going to be stealing one of my colleagues' jokes here. But in the past, when Kepware has attended LiveWorks, it kind of felt like that we were at someone else's prom, is how he put it. But this time, it really felt that we were there. It was we were the bells of the ball. So it was really cool to be able to be a part of that, to contribute to a lot of the events, a lot of the kiosks, a lot of the demos, a lot of the scripting and all that. Really awesome to be a part of it.
Yeah, that's cool. So you just said you joined Kepware in 2019. I'm actually a bit surprised. I thought, Kyle, based on maybe it's just your technical knowledge, but that's pretty recent. Did you have a ton of Kepware experience prior?
Yeah, sort of. Yeah. So I was fortunate enough right after school. I ended up joining a Rockwell distributor up in New England, actually. So I was with them for probably about 5 or 6 years, and they really put me through the gamut in a good way. I spent the majority of my 20s on the factory floor somewhere in New England, somewhere in New York, and I ended up becoming a PLC industrial or PLC specialist, information software specialist, industrial networking specialist. Just did the whole gamut of industrial automation. Granted, sorry, Trav, it's a little bit of Rockwell bias there, but I was really able to go in and really get, just kind of get exposed to that whole industry and just fell in love with it. So, in the industry now for about 10 years, but at Kepware only for, I think it's coming up on 4 years now.
Yeah, and they were mostly COVID years, so that counts as 8.
Right, exactly. Yeah.
So your background, they're kind of a jack of all trades, putting your hands on all kinds of different things. You've seen the fruit of that.
Yeah.
And I know Lenny well enough to know that Lenny at Flow Software, how are you, sir? That's kind of your background too, correct? You can relate.
It's almost a copy paste, I want to say. Yeah, so exactly the same kind of thing. Exactly started off with a Rockwell system integrator right after university. It wasn't in factory floors as much as underground mining, so I had my fair share of doing underground mining automation. But still, same story. I had a 3.5. I always joke about it. I had a 3.5 millimeter screwdriver in my pocket. That was the best tool to have. But did everything, pulling cables, PLC coding, Scada development. And then luckily I got out of the underground world and saw the light a bit and moved a little bit into information management. That's when obviously I joined the Flow team and really started to understand, all these devices and controllers. How do we get it into a historian, and how do we leverage that data from a historian to actually become meaningful information? So very fortunate in my 15 years of experience to literally have seen pretty much all the way from the bits and the bobs to the right at the bottom to where it gets integrated to ERP systems. So jack of, we call it in South Africa, jack of all trades, master of none, but have kind of that broad experience in the whole stack there.
Yeah, in the States we call you a utility player. That's a
okay.
Nice little baseball reference. I'll explain baseball to you later on.
Yeah,
I had the privilege of taking Lenny to his first American football game on a previous trip, and we'll have to do baseball on the next trip. Cool. Hey, Clark, how are you, sir?
Jeff, I'm doing good. Yeah, glad to be here.
And how's everything in the world of Canary?
It's really good. It's exciting. It's fast paced, and there's a lot of opportunities. So just trying to take advantage of all of it. But it's been great. So we're growing, which is a good problem to have. But there's a couple of challenges associated with that. But it's been really awesome.
That's great. And Clark, Clark is part of the business development side of Canary, and it's always interesting to trace the business development team's path into industrial automation, because very rarely is it the 4-year engineering degree and then I learned how to sell and they made me a business development guy. It's usually just the opposite. Clark, give us a little bit of background on your journey into Canary.
Yeah, Jeff, that's totally true. It's been kind of, for both of us, and I think for other folks in business development spaces, in the tech industry, that's often the case. It's been kind of a circuitous career path for me. So I actually did my undergrad in business. Prior to that, I had about 15 years in Legos. So I loved working with my hands. I loved building projects. I was always really geared towards mechanical, manufacturing, engineering, material science types things. So out of school with a business degree, logically, I ended up becoming an engineer for research projects at University of Nevada, Las Vegas. So I worked just with principal investigators and folks that were basically just trying to, keep their systems running. And so through that, I did a lot of machine code. I did a lot of CNC machining, a lot of advising for undergraduate through postdoc students on different mechanical projects. And just being in that advanced manufacturing world, that's how I kind of got exposed to automation. And so I was working really just with discrete manufacturing, but then through different connections, this opportunity at Canary came open, and I just really felt like that was the right career transition for me to make. So now I'm taking some of my knowledge, which is much more discrete manufacturing, but learning about, the process industry and how data historians relate to that. And then also just trying to communicate and articulate the value proposition of Canary, and then keep my eyes on some of the things on the horizon that, it's true that if you're not willing to disrupt your own company, then somebody else will be happy to do it for you. And so some of my role here is just, looking out for these opportunities. And so, I can come on to more of that later, but really it's something that I really enjoy. I love communicating. I think that all communication is service. And so that's what I'm really applying myself to here at Canary in this season.
Cool. Yeah, that's awesome, Clark. And I relate really well to that concept of trying to disrupt your own company. One of the neat things about bringing somebody from the outside in, outside of maybe the industry or outside of the vertical you're focused on, or even outside of, the typical career path, is that person tends to ask questions that no one else would ask just out of ignorance, right? And when those questions get asked, it makes everybody kind of re-examine the way that things are done, which is a great path towards disruption. So that's awesome. All right, Josh. Josh at Skellig. How are you, sir?
Hey, Jeff. Doing good.
So what's new with you, and how on earth did you get into life sciences system integration work?
By accident, really. Didn't know what this world was before I got into it. I was looking for a job after school. My buddy at the time was interning at a company, and I actually graduated school with an IT degree as opposed to engineering. So they were looking for an IT guy at the time, and I was looking for a job, and it just was who I knew at the time. So yeah. I got in there and, was told this is Delta V, but also this is Pi. And I didn't even know what any of it was. So it's been an interesting journey getting to this point where I feel like I know what I'm talking about being here.
Lots of Google searches while people are in conversation.
Frantically, of course.
Yeah. Did you start an acronym cheat sheet by chance?
Back in the day, but working from home the past couple of years with my fiance in the corner, she's like, I don't understand your work just because there's too many acronyms. We do love our TLAs, 3-letter acronyms.
You're exactly right. The first time I asked someone, because for those that don't know me, my background is certainly not in engineering or in industrial automation. But 7-8 years ago, when I learned about OPC for the first time, I said, oh, okay, so what's the acronym OPC? And someone said, oh, that's OLE for process control. I was like, oh, okay, cool. OLE? Yeah, OLE. I was like, well, is that an acronym? They're like, yeah, I think it was something like object linked embed
I forget
environment.
Yeah.
Yeah, something, right? And I'm like, okay, so this is an industry where acronyms get embedded inside of acronyms.
Well, yeah.
That's a no-win for me, for sure.
It makes sense, doesn't
it? So Josh, for you, you found life sciences because you found IT work within an integrator that was focused in life sciences. Is that about right?
Yeah. I, unlike a couple of these other guys, I started more in the Delta V world of system integrator, and then switched in 2 years to a different integrator that was kind of more a jack of all trades, did Rockwell, Delta V, Siemens. That's where I got started experiencing ignition and then Canary, getting some of those more cool new softwares that we all love here. I don't really want to go back to the old ones, but that's just me. And then about a year and a half ago, I found Skellig, and it's been great. And having a great time here.
Yeah. And Amy, is that similar to your story? Amy's joining us from Skellig as well. Is that how you found yourself as a life science integrator?
It's funny, actually. I initially wanted to do process engineering. So in my undergrad, I did a year as like a co-op, what they call it, doing process. And what I kind of learned during that time was I really liked the automation side because I kind of felt I could actually solve the problems and make an impact. So I remember I bought the book, like VBA for Dummies, read it cover to cover because that's what they were using at their site. So when I graduated, then I went into looking for, okay, how can I do more, automation? I was lucky, I guess. Well, we'll say lucky. I've been doing life science integration since I graduated college. I started at a bigger systems integrator, and then I moved over to Skellig. Something I liked about Skellig was they're a bit more agile. So like Josh said, like they're kind of embracing these newer technologies, which is way more fun to work with because honestly, I think they're a lot better than your traditional, automation integration that a lot of people are using from like 10 years ago.
Yeah. So Josh and Amy, you get to see a ton of those older systems inside of life science. We don't have to, we don't have to name names or pick on those vendors particularly. I think that'd be, no reason to do it. But walk us through in those traditional systems. I guess the first question is, are they still getting put in today? And if so, why? And what are the limitations of making those selections from your perspective, at least?
So I definitely see them going in today. Absolutely. It's really a couple reasons. One, very much in the life sciences world, is if it's not proven elsewhere, no one wants to really take that risk and be that first example of trying something that hasn't been done elsewhere. So those other softwares we know have been around for 10, 20, more than those years. So they can just be trusted and have gone through the 21 CFR Part 11 process of making sure they're compliant and going through the qualifications and validations. So when you make that choice, it's kind of like your safe choice. It's going to get the job done. It's going to meet the requirements that the site needs. But it's exactly that, the safe choice. It's not going to be agile enough to integrate well with the ever-changing landscape of our technological world. So it's a safe choice, but the risk or the cost is, how do I advance and evolve this system? Or is it outdated the day I put it in? Amy, what's your approach on it? What's your take?
I think a lot of it is like Josh said, they know it works, and most people don't even know that there are other options. I have a lot of friends who use these same old softwares, and I ask them, I'm like, why aren't you using X or Y? And they have no idea what I'm talking about. So I'd say a lot of it comes down to just lack of knowledge, which is why this is great. I think once people realize that they do have options and they see the benefits, we'll start to see it more widely implemented. What's exciting, though, is we are starting to see some of these first-of-kind implementations going in. And like Josh said, once it's been proven somewhere and you can kind of point, like, look at their success, life sciences or other companies are way more willing to, use something newer.
Yeah. Now, Kyle, on the Kepware side, I'm guessing Kepware's had a foot in the life science world for as long as any data collector or data acquisition tool has, probably, right?
I would say so, yeah.
Yeah. Specifically because I think Kepware is one of the ways to connect to these older incumbents, right? And so that's to be expected. But I'm curious, Travis and Clark, from the IA and Canary side, what have you seen in the last 2 years, 1 year, as far as your life science penetration? How's that been increasing, staying the same, or decreasing?
I could start. I mean, definitely I've seen it increased quite a bit in the last, say, 4 or 5 years. And that's really due to, I'd say, the integration partners, companies like Skellig who go out there and are basically saying, hey, look, we know a better technology. We know we can provide better, more benefit for you guys, and we could do it and have it validated and do it all safely. And so they're proving that, right? They're proving that success. And you really, at the end of the day, you have to kind of talk the talk, right? With the life sciences industry, you have to be able to check all the boxes, and 21 CFR 11 compliance for us historically, it's something that Ignition's been able to do, but we didn't really shout it off the rooftops. We didn't have a document that went through all the details and how that can be accomplished. And so if somebody's coming to the website and happen to find a product, they don't see that document, or they don't see the kind of check mark off of that, then it's harder for them to say, I want to go the next step, right? So it does take people to kind of show that. So not only with integrators, but we're kind of maturing in that we're putting more features, and we're building those guidelines so that we can help grow that industry and help them move forward. So that's why we see the increase that we have. It's really putting that focus on that vertical.
Yeah. And I mean, from the outside perspective, it seems like we've seen Ignition in more and more and more and more and more life science applications. So, I mean, it definitely seems like it's worked. The momentum seems like it's there, right?
Yeah, and I think we'll talk about this today, but I think the trends of doing more digital transformation trends, doing more with data, it kind of you can't use these legacy systems in order to be able to bring in newer technologies, right? Especially like getting to the cloud and AI and analytics and things like that. So you have to kind of have modern stuff in there. So it's these are kind of forcing companies as well, right, to get into to using more modern stuff.
Yeah, and Clark, your perspective?
Yeah, our perspective is probably very similar to yours, Travis. We're seeing the same thing. We're seeing a lot of demand and growth, in the Northeast and with pharmaceuticals and life sciences and those applications. And, certainly have to give credit to the integrators that have brought us into a lot of those opportunities. But because of that demand, that has driven some of our development pipeline and some of what we've prioritized in terms of adding features to the product. So really, that's just been the effect that those opportunities have had on Canary. And it's been exciting. And like I said, there's some growth pains associated, but it's been really, really fantastic.
Yeah. Thanks, Clark. So, Amy, Josh, one of the kind of oversights maybe for someone in life sciences in picking their solution stack with such a strong emphasis on compliance is that they're potentially shortchanging their ability to do everything else with their data long term, right? Just for playing it safe isn't always safe. So what are some of the other common mistakes or oversights that you see when an organization is just chasing that compliance and not thinking larger thoughts?
Sometimes I see they just get too caught up in the compliance piece and the procedure piece. So they put in a lot of layers to make sure that compliance is met, but the procedures are prohibitive because it makes making those changes that you want to your landscape a lot harder to get to that end stage of having that new software implemented or that new solution implemented. So it kind of almost hinders them just from the pace it takes to get to that end point of saying you're validated. Just because for those who aren't familiar with the life sciences world, you don't just code the solution and upload it to the system and you're done. You kind of, that's the 5-minute work that you think should be done. But the hours of paperwork of documenting what you did, updating all the other paperwork that are involved with that system, validating it to make sure that what you made does what you say it does, and then qualifying it to show that it actually does what it does. So all of those added layers just makes it a time suck, really.
Amy, anything to add?
Sure. Yeah, I think there's also kind of a people problem with it too in life sciences. So we care so much about quality and validation. You have groups who that's all they do. They live and breathe that. And they might not exactly understand the technology side of things. So they can ask for things that seem unreasonable if you knew how things worked, but they don't know. So I think it ties back to that education. If you're trying to chase compliance, you need to take the time to get your validation group to be familiar with the technology and how it is secure. Because once they know, that's been my experience. If you can explain something well, you can explain, okay, this is outbound only or something like that. They'll be way more willing to embrace it and kind of dial back a little and make things go easier.
Yeah. You mentioned, Amy and Josh, and I think we've already been talking about it, right? This concept of getting access to these systems while still maintaining compliance. And Lenny, I know that's really kind of where your world starts in this environment, is wanting to connect to all of the things that are under these compliance restrictions. From the flow side, how do you see the compliance restrictions of 21 CFR making your life harder, or does it affect you in order to be able to connect to all these different systems and then provide value?
I don't think it makes our lives harder, Jeff. Maybe on the having the ability to connect with secure certificates to those different data sources, etc., might be a bit tricky if it's an old legacy protocol or something like that. So from a connection perspective, yes, it might make it a bit tricky. But the important thing to note is that especially from our perspective, and something that's very important from us from a philosophy perspective and flow, is we don't duplicate data. So the data that's already been rubber stamped within the individual systems, they stay there. What we do is we give you the capability to have a holistic approach of managing all of these different data silos that might be in your common tool set that you've implemented to actually get CRF 21. Look, we've got 4 or 5 vendors on the call here, and each one of these are going to make up your compliance, right? It's not going to be one tool that's going to fit and then that's going to give you that rubber stamp. So the idea for us is to bring that holistic approach, not to touch, not to disrupt the raw data that sits in these silos, but give you a central way to access it, manage it, and turn that thing into something that's available to everybody within the organization. I think I don't think it's just CRF that we're talking about. I think Travis mentioned it. It's digital transformation on the whole. Has this kind of scenario where people is maybe latched on to one tool and they try to use that tool everywhere else in the organization, and then they run into pitfalls where they just create another silo without thinking about adopting a common tool set rather than have a proliferal of tools to use. And I think that's very important to understand, is to figure out what does business need, what does business want, go and look for that common tool set, and I think match the common tool set to the correct use case for business. Don't try to force something. You always say, Jeff, don't put a lipstick on the pig. But yeah, don't try and force something where it's not going to fit. That's when you're going to start having issues, especially getting the data and making the data available to everybody.
Yeah, and I think, Amy, you brought up in the project last week, you had a nice slide that showed a handshake between 21 CFR or just best practices around data governance and electronic record keeping and Industry 4.0 or digital transformation. Can you speak a little bit to us about how you see those two things coming together and why it's so important?
Yeah, definitely. So Industry 4.0, is really about data access, getting rid of those data silos, then using that data to make, the best decisions you can for your business. And then 21 CFR is, okay, how can you digitize, these paper records in a secure way? I see them as kind of this symbiotic relationship. The way that you're going to maximize leveraging 21 CFR Part 11 is by maximizing what data is digitized. But the only way you can do that's like affordable and scalable is by using a quote unquote Industry 4.0 solution, which is, all the technology we have here today.
And having the ability to unplug a piece of that technology and plug in a different piece is really the flexibility of that, right? So if at any point, there's a solution that you're not happy with, or you want to evaluate a secondary solution or add something to the stack, the ability to do that. Whereas I think when you go down that original, here's the vendor I'm going to use, the incumbent, everything's provided, it's safe, well, you're stuck with that forever because that vendor has not opened up their solution to anything outside of their ecosystem, right?
Right, and then you're stuck using whatever stack they sold you, which is never going to be best in class for all different softwares.
Yeah, and probably more expensive. I would just take it.
It's definitely. Nope. I mean, that's the great side effect. If you know you walked in somebody, you can kind of get those prices how you like them because they have no other option.
Yeah. So this concept of a digital transformation, here on the IntegrateLive side, we've branded and called it a unified analytics framework. This concept of being able to pass real-time, historic, manual data, relational data, time series data, you name it, through a data ecosystem to all of the different data consumers and data producers. How does the group see that helping actually with data governance and with electronic record keeping? I mean, it really does seem like it goes hand in hand. I'm curious from the vendor perspective.
I can start, Jeff, because you're asking about what we've seen kind of in trends, not only in growing the industry, growing for us, but just sort of what's changed within that. And I've seen the architecture is what's really changed a lot with a lot of these different systems and sort of how it's being deployed, right? It's not one big black box siloed application. It's broken up into multiple different pieces. And I do believe that makes the data governance and the validation process a lot easier because you're actually doing that on smaller pieces of the system, right? Because if you can, for example, look at the edge, right? I'm connecting to controllers and I'm getting the data into a central system. Well, I can validate that process, right? And how that data is moving around and ensure that, that data can get to more consumers, but that it can't be modified or whatever, right? And then you kind of do that with all the other pieces, and you can allows you to put the best in breed products together. So it's more about openness and the interoperability than it is about trying to have one thing that one size fits all, because that's just unrealistic in today's world, right? With how things are changing. So,
yeah. And to add on to your thought, Travis, specifically around, again, with the concept of a unified analytic framework, or UAF, what are we talking about? We're talking about functional namespaces, right? So over at the edge, at site, there's multiple functional namespaces that are already happening. Sometimes it might be within an MQTT broker or inside of the historian of choice or the Scada platform of choice. Mature organizations may have spent years of project time and millions of dollars trying to force everything into one standardized naming pattern, right? And sometimes they're successful in it, although often if they're growing, they're acquiring, and then that makes that even more difficult to maintain. What we're talking about on the data governance side is being able to basically have multiple functional namespaces, or UAFs, whether it's edge, site, enterprise, or anywhere in between, where for the data analytics and the data passing, the information sharing side, you're able to govern and maintain one large functional namespace for that layer of your process, right? Your data analytics and information sharing process. Thanks, Travis. Good point. Kyle, Lenny, Clark, anything to add?
Yeah, well, I agree with Travis, and one of my favorite topics, whether it's at a bar, at a trade show, or on a webinar, something like this, or another podcast, but it's the similarities between traditional SCADA systems and, like, let's say an IoT or an IIoT system, because I think, your traditional OT controls engineer is going to look at IoT and be like, well, yeah, we've been doing that. It's called Scada. And what's really interesting, and I'm glad Travis brought it up, is it's the same concept. It's how it's being architected is different. Because IoT, IIoT, all that stuff, like scalability and being centralized and having some way to centrally manage a large scale deployment is really the biggest, in my eyes, like the biggest differentiator between the two. So Jeff, as you said, like being able to have that layer abstracted of like, hey, here's how we're going to govern all of our data. Here's how we're going to lock it down from all these disparate devices, but in a centralized way is huge. And that's absolutely the trend that we're starting to see companies start to implement, or at least starting to think about implementing that. So I'm with you both 100%.
Yeah, and one thing I want to point out, because Amy said earlier, is that there has to be the people that are in the compliance and the validation, in that group have to understand the technologies. Well, in order to understand the technologies, we have to be transparent about the technology view, about how the data is actually moving around, what the security footprint looks like, and it can't look like a black box that is just like, y'all trust us, it just works, right? It has to be something that is well understood, because if that's the case, you can kind of take that 1,000-foot level, like, okay, if I understand technology, I can get my compliance validation around the different pieces and how it actually works. And I think that's a different picture than it traditionally has been.
Yeah, well said. So let's talk about taking this concept, right? Because now what we're no longer really even talking about 21 CFR here, right? We're talking about just best data practices inside of an organization that wants to have good audit trail and good electronic record keeping. This is where it becomes so applicable to every industry inside of our space, right? So ideally, really, what the separation, at least in my mind, of why do it this way in life sciences and why do it over here, however we want, really does come back to not understanding that you don't have to use the incumbent only in order to follow these best practices. And that's what I think the project was so helpful for, was being able to see Travis, Lenny, Clark, Kyle, just the level of restrictiveness, I guess, or if not even restrictiveness, but record keeping that can be configured into each of these solutions. Question for each of the vendors: everybody kind of did a configuration for the most part to get there. Why not just have it out of the box, locked down that tight? Who wants to go first? I
can take a stab at it, I guess. Okay. Yeah, so from a Kepware perspective, like, obviously our whole claim to fame is, hey, we're agnostic. We'll connect to anything and everything. We fit into all sorts of industries, and I think by not having it locked down, well, Jeff, I agree with you. Like, yeah, maybe we should have a lockdown. Security is a big thing now, but the whole point is we want to get you up and running as quick as you can with these POCs, and I know, I would assume most people on here, when they're doing a POC, the first thing they do if they're connecting to a, say, UA source or something, right? You go, anonymous client, no security certificates, let's just get the data flowing, right? Like, we want to make that easy. But also we recognize that, yeah, it should be locked down eventually. Let's not just be open, for the world to see what's going on in our plant. So to me, like, I think that's why we don't have that lockdown already, or lockdown to begin with, is because it just adds a layer of complexity on top of something that is inherently already complex. So that's my thought of it. Whether it's right or wrong, who knows?
Yeah, you're trusting the environment first. Is essentially it. Yeah.
Well, I would say that it's that actually, if you look at the products here, they are compliant out, or they can be secure and compliant out of the box, right? The question is, why don't we have the settings already turned on? And the answer is really because it's going into the customer's environment, right? If we have these settings, we're making decisions for them, and that's not necessarily the way it should be. This is a shared responsibility model, right? They have another ecosystem. They have a identity system with authorization. They've got security profiles, all these things with that their IT teams are putting together. They got security certificates, all these things that then need to be applied to that so that it fits into their ecosystem and is trusted within their environment. We can't just do that out of the box, right? That's something that they have to be able to turn on. So I'd say we could do a lot of that. It's just going to look weird, right? You're going to go into it and it's going to be self-signed certificate through here, and it's going to be, are you sure you want to trust this in your browser? Like, that's not the kind of thing that they want. So I think it's really because we don't have it, because they need to, there's a responsibility on the customer side or the integrator is putting it in to put it in properly.
And is that the same experience, Amy and Josh, with the older systems, where there's still a bunch of configuration that needs to be enabled in order to get there?
Yeah, for sure. Even no matter any system I've heard say it's easy to be Part 11 compliant and comes out of the box, it still needs work.
Yeah. Yeah.
And Jeff, I'll
Clark.
add a remark that, just to Travis's point, I think that's exactly why it's better to bake those things into the conversation, because even if you provided it out of the box ready with all of your boxes checked, I don't think there's any chance that they're going to have, a compliant solution to their satisfaction without having someone internally within their company that is able to manage, that responsibility. And so I think it's better, that we just bake it into a conversation and highlight that capability, and then let them take it from there with, maybe a small amount of hand-holding. But I think that's just better done through conversation rather than just writing the software directly upon install.
Yeah, and I think from our side, Jeff, it's exactly the same. There is a responsibility of the client to understand what security and what part does he want to, secure from what persons and organizations and business units. And just remember, there's a big portion of culture shock here, right? You're taking a guy that's been doing his Excel worksheet and his paper trail for the past 5 years. All of a sudden, you're giving him a browser, and as Travis said, now there's a little lock that he needs to click and accept. That guy is going to almost, I want to say, freak out. So it's all about communication, the understanding that this thing is a company-wide thing. It's not something you can forward down. It needs to be talked about. Each business unit in the organization needs to understand what their role is, their focus is, and what they're going to get out of this. If you're not going to have that type of conversations, then it's going to die, unfortunately. So I think that's very important just to understand as well that it might be a massive culture shock for people to go this whole, not just CF21, but digital transformation in a whole. It's something you need to take piece by piece.
Yeah, I want to mention that, we showed this last time that it's, they have to have a responsibility, but it shouldn't be hard to do, right? So all these products you saw, it's very, very easy. You go in, there's a few settings that you can change and turn on, and you're not having to go into configuration files and write YAML code or all this kind of stuff. You're just using a simple UIs to make this happen, and it's our responsibility to make these to make it easy for the integrator or the client to actually do it. And to follow the modern practices that are out there today.
And I think that just goes back to what kind of I said during the presentation, and we talked about that. There's no real governing body for any of these softwares that says you are decreed Part 11 compliant. So it's of the responsibility of those quality and validation groups that Amy and I have talked about to determine that software is good for your organization and will be compliant. So when that organization is sending data to the FDA, it is trustworthy.
Amy and Josh, have you, in your experience, ever seen?
Right, and
yeah, go ahead, Amy. Sorry.
No, I was just gonna say, to Josh's point, though. I mean, even if you're not sending data to the FDA, I think it's worth reiterating. You want to have trustworthy data because that's how you make sure you have high quality. If something goes wrong, it's really great to be able to look back and see what happened, who was there, who was meddling with what, Hand it back to you, Jeff.
That's a great point. That's a great point. And maybe you're not sending data to the FDA. Maybe you're sending it to another regulatory agency, a client, your CTO, your a control operator who has a really important decision to make. At the end of the day, whatever you're sending has to be accurate, it has to be transparent, it has to be trustworthy. And if it's not those three things, don't send it, right? All right. Hey, we're wrapping up. Final couple minutes. Shows for the remainder of the year. We are in, what is it? It's June, beginning of June, 2023. We've got 6 months of 2023 ahead of us. What are a few of the shows, user groups, destinations that are on your calendars? What's coming up? Travis, low-hanging fruit. Is there anything?
We are definitely gearing up for our conference, Ignition Community Conference, ICC. That's happening in September. We pretty much wiped the calendar of summer because that's coming up. It's always a big event for us, so that's happening. But after that, there's we're going to SPS in Nuremberg. That show has been pretty big. There's quite a few shows just happened, right, with things like CSIA and all of those, and it's great to kind of see these conversations come alive at those events. Can't wait for them.
Any other shows? Clark, you guys are always active at the shows. Where are you headed?
Yeah, we've got a new one that we'll be adding is going to be RE Plus, which is going to be it's the largest renewable energy convention or show and it's going to be in Las Vegas there in September. So that's going to be new. This hasn't even really been something that we've necessarily sought out, but we've just seen tremendous growth in solar and renewable energy. And so that's just been kind of a transition in our company that we're, hopping on that momentum and investing in that area. So we'll be there, among other places.
The sun has been shining on y'all, Clark. That's bad.
That's very bad, Jim.
That's all right. I don't mind.
We also have the wind at our backs with the wind turbines. And we're honestly riding the wave of hopefully some wave power generation technology. That hasn't hit yet.
I just hope you can store up the energy you're going to need for all of these conferences, Clark.
Ryan.
Amy and Josh, are there any pharma life science shows, big events coming up?
Not sure if there's any that Skellig's attending, but I know coming up very soon there's a big Bio 23 conference that a lot of organizations will attend, doing a lot of sharing of thoughts and ideas, trying to find partners. So that seems like it's going to be a cool event just to see what comes out of that.
Yeah. CESME. CESME is an organization I don't know that everybody's aware of. CESMII. That's an acronym. Smart Manufacturing Initiative inside of the United States. So they've got a neat little user group set up in October in Greenville, South Carolina. Go to CESME.org, I think, if you want to check out that information. Greenville, South Carolina, it's worth a trip for a weekend just in itself. That's a neat town, and it should be a great time of year to be there. I'll be there for that, representing actually Flo Lenny on that one. And Lenny, you're thinking about a trip to the United States later in the fall, dates to be determined, yeah?
Yeah, might even join you guys at ICC, might even join Nuremberg. So those two conferences definitely on the radar. And then locally in South Africa, we will be doing a local roadshow in October as well, just going through all the partners in the major cities in South Africa as well. So yeah, some travel coming up, and hope we'll see you guys a little bit in person sometime.
Yeah, and Kyle, we see Kepware pretty much almost everywhere, right? PTC or Kepware.
Yeah, we're all over. Yeah, I think we'll I'm assuming we're sending people to ICC, so we'll definitely be at the Inductive show. We're obviously going to Automation Fair, which I think is in Boston this year. So we'll have a big presence there, I'm sure. So we'll be, there's a show in Florida coming up at the end of June. I'm not going to that one, but one of my colleagues just said she's going to that. So yeah, we're all over. And then, personally, we're doing a big international tour, going to see all our partners. So I'll be all over the globe in the fall.
Oh, fun. Yeah. Shows in Florida in June. That's a tough pull. Yeah. Orlando in June. It'll be nice. That's tough. All right. Hey, that puts this episode in the books. Everybody, thank you so much. I really appreciate the work that you put into the project last week. I think anybody that would like to watch that can go to IntegrateLive.com. There's an entire library of all of our previous episodes. You'll see the previous project right there at the top. And for everyone who wants to go ahead and mark their calendars, we will do July 12th and July 19th of next month. We are exploring LoRaWAN technology for data acquisition, and specifically how to make it really easy to take a variety of LoRaWAN sensors and through, Travis, you were not even aware of this, but probably that it's on the pipe, but through a module that and kind of an integrator reseller wrote that lives on Inductive Automation's third-party module showcase, through a module, you can basically pull up on your phone a QR code, scan it, and go with almost a huge plethora of LoRaWAN sensors to get that data up to a gateway and get that data fed into a control system for not for bi-directional, but for having that information as part of your control decision making. And so it's going to be a neat show. We're going to have a speaker from the LoRaWAN Alliance, as well as a hands-on project build out, and that's going to be on July 12th and 19th. So looking forward to that event. Hope to see everyone there. Thank you, everybody. Have a great one.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.